If I were to ask you what you are thankful for, what would be on your list? You know, on Thanksgiving, we make lists like that. Sometimes we sit down and say, now, what are you thankful for? What are you grateful for? And we will come up with something. We're grateful for this or that. And it's part of our list. Then there's always a child. If you think about a child who's young, he's listened to people who are older when they say prayers at the dinner table. Our kids had a friend when they were little that we went to their house and he said the blessing. And as he said the blessing, we bowed our heads and he started thanking God for the fork, the knife, the spoon, the plate, the bowl, the napkin, the cup, the juice that was in the cup, and on and on and on. He had a list. That list was important to him because it was his life. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But is that all that's on the list when you're grateful? We'd like to take a moment to think about the things that need to be part of the what of gratitude. What's on our lists? And as we do that, it's interesting to find out what happens. Now, first of all, there are some physical things on our list, without doubt. When you ask people, they will always say things like their home or their health or their job or their abundance, and those are all good things. When I go to Nicaragua, I come back and I have a list. It's a very small list, by the way. I'm thankful for 3 things when I get back. Number 1, I am thankful for clean beds. Number 2, I'm thankful for hot showers. The 3rd thing I'm thankful for is plumbing that works. You give me those 3 things, I'm a happy man. But if that's all it is, then we have some problems. Because when you look at the bulk of the New Testament, there's very little said about the things of life. Really, they're kind of missing. Even when you get to a place like Matthew chapter 6, in which Jesus delves into the particulars of what we need and what we want, what we wear, what we eat. In that same chapter, he teaches the disciples to pray. But there's nothing in there that says, thank you for the food, or thank you for the clothes. Now, that doesn't say that Jesus wasn't thankful. We do know that when he sat down for a meal, he would break bread and he would pray a prayer of thanksgiving. But it's interesting to note that how little people talk about the things of their life in the New Testament. For us, it may be a reflection of our spiritual priorities, because there's nothing that clarifies your spiritual priorities quite as well as what you're grateful for. And we tend to do top of mind stuff. We're kind of like that dog Doug in the Pixar movie Up. Doug is this loyal, stupid dog, if you will. And he will carry on all kinds of conversation focuses right up until the nearest squirrel darts out. And then suddenly he's off to the races. He's chasing the things immediate to him. Now, we're not chasing furry creatures with fluffy tails. But we have our own spiritual squirrels that we deal with. The things we chase, the things that are top of mind, the things that are important to us. And it's very appropriate to be grateful for the physical things of life. But it's insufficient if that's all you have are the physical things of life. So, what kind of deeper cut do we need to take spiritually? Perhaps a good place to start is Paul and his prayers. Now, if you listen to Paul, he's not concerned about the physical at all. Here is the man who says, I have learned to be happy when I'm deprived or when I have plenty. In fact, he tells the Philippians in Philippians chapter 4, the first 11 verses, he said, I have learned the secret to enough. So he's not concerned. He can be starving and be okay. And he can be full. He can be okay. He can be in prison and he's okay. He can be walking the road free and he's okay. See, for Paul, this discussion tends to bleed over into nothingness because you hear this sound of silence from his mouth when he is talking about what he's praying about. But if you do listen into his prayers, as recorded in his letters, you hear what's important to him. He's all about people. For instance, in Romans chapter 16, there's this long list, and he says, greet all these people. Now, I don't for 1 minute think that is a spiritual drive-by where he waves, hi, how you guys doing? Good to see you. Instead, I think what those are people he keeps thinking about in his prayers and mentioning in his prayers. They have meant something to him. He mentions some people specifically. There's Onesiphorus in 2 Timothy chapter 1 in verse 16. Onesiphorus is there with Paul in prison. And Paul says, he has refreshed me. He has been a soul lifter. That's the word he uses. A soul lifter. When I've been down, he's lifted my soul and my spirits. It's great to have somebody that does that. We all need a soul lifter from time to time. Or there's Epaphroditus in Philippians chapter 2. In verse 25, he tells the Philippians, he said, I appreciate you sending him to me, but you need to understand something. He almost died trying to help me. He risked his life. For that, Paul was eternally grateful. But why? Why does Paul remember people in his prayers? What makes his list, if you will? Well, let's look at a few. In Romans chapter 1, in verse 8, it talks about that he is grateful for the Romans because their faith is reported all over the world. They are a beacon of faith. The word he uses for reported is the word for shine. Their faith shines brightly all over the world. Everybody knows who they are and what they're doing. They know how faithful they are. Wouldn't it be great if somebody said, I know you. I've heard about your faith. See, we're grateful when people show great faith. This past Sunday, Christian Shoemate was baptized in Colorado by his brother Dalton. And we all rejoice. It's not just because of his baptism, but because it is an example of faith that shows us what we all have together. That's what it is. And so we have this we thank people for their faith that they show us because it helps us to have more faith. So do you know people like that? They need to be on your list. Well, there's some others. Paul writes about the Philippians. And in the very preamble to the book of Philippians, to the letter of Philippians, he talks about the Philippians and their partnership in the gospel with him. He's thankful for the common cause they share in the gospel. He uses the term fellowship rather than partnership. Partnership is one of those words that sounds too much like business. They were business partners. They weren't. It was closer than that. See, from the time of the inception of that church, when it was only Lydia and this unnamed jailer and his family, they were shoulder to shoulder supporting Paul, praying for Paul, doing whatever they could to help Paul. Oh, Paul was grateful for the fellowship in his work and the joint work together they were doing for the gospel. We need to be thankful for people who join with us in the belief and the faith and the spreading of the gospel. Paul was. But Paul was also, he looked for people who inspired others. He turns to the Thessalonians. In the beginnings of 1 Thessalonians, the letter of the 1 Thessalonians, in verses 2 to 4, he talks about that they have this work that's produced by faith, this labor of love, and this endurance of hope. He uses that holy triad there: faith, hope, and love. He says in using those words together, there's something you can kind of capture together. He said they have an energy and a grit about them. And that was high praise for the Thessalonians. If you think about the circumstances out of which the birth of that church came, it's amazing it survived. Paul had preached there, and 3 weeks later, the persecution had got so intense it drove him from the town. And we don't think he ever went back. We don't know, at least. But even when he left that fledgling church in Thessalonica, they stayed with their faith. It would have been easy for them to have crumbled. They could have said, I don't like this. We don't need this. We'll go back to our old life. Paul's gone. Who cares? See, they had been really converted to Christ, not to Paul. And so they had this energy and this grit. And Paul, from wherever he was, could look back at those great people in Thessalonica and say, I love them and I'm thankful because they do what I want to do too. Do you know people like that? That have that kind of energy and that kind of grit? You need to put them on your list. Because you see, if you look at these things, people mean more than things. Now we know that, but we tend to forget it because people tend to be ubiquitous around us. We're just now beginning to discover something, being isolated in our homes under shelter-in-place orders, how much we miss people. We've learned we're not like the cannibal who was fed up with people. Instead, we want them in our lives. We need them in our lives. But I want you to think for just a moment, even while we're here separated, I want you to think about the people who inspire you to live better, the people who show you their faith, the people who have the energy and the grit to stay in things even when times are tough. Think about those people and be grateful for them because they're helping you and me be better at what we could be. But then there is this area that all of us share, regardless how much money we have or how many things we have. No matter how many people we know and how grateful we are for them, there is something that goes beyond that. It carries through the whole history of Christendom to this very day. And that's the gifts of God. What gifts did God give? Well, Paul knew them. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, as he's writing these letters to his young friend Timothy to instruct him on how to conduct business, if you will, of ministry at Ephesus, you hear him say how thankful he is to God for something. He says in verse 12, he says, I am thankful for the strength that God has given me and for the appointing me to his service. Now, that word strength is the word we get our English word dynamo or dynamite from. It has explosive power. But Paul doesn't talk about the outward explosion of the dynamo. He talks about the inner strength within. I'm sure there are days that Paul wanted to quit and give up. Who doesn't at times? But there was something, a fire that was inside him, a dynamo that God had placed in his heart through the constant contact with the Almighty that kept him going in the worst of times. Oh, Paul said, I've got this dynamo that God has given to me. And I am so grateful for the strength that he gives because I don't have it on my own. And he talks about the appointment to service. God laid on him something. That's the words that he used. He laid on him a service. And when he laid it on him, it's interesting that when Paul brings that out, why he brings it out. He's going to be the messenger to the Gentiles. But I think it's more than just that message that he's trying to deliver. He's trying to deliver another one. He said, I'm a reclamation project. There was a time I persecuted the church. And somehow God took that piece out of the trash, put it back together again, and made a messenger out of him. Now, which of us cannot say exactly the same thing? God took us out of the trash and put us together and made something worthwhile of our lives. All of us. We don't have to be apostles. We don't have to travel the world. God lays responsibilities on you and I. If you're younger and you have children to raise, God has given you a grand responsibility. He has appointed you to service, to raise them the way they need to be raised. When you come across a time where you can help someone, God has appointed you to service to make this world more compassionate than it was, and to be his ambassador of compassion. If you come across someone who doesn't know anything about Jesus, you put on your shoulders the responsibility to say something about what you believe in. But Paul, as much as he can get specific, sometimes he just can't. He doesn't know what to say. It doesn't come to him in words. That's what's true about 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians 9 is part of 2 chapters that we usually throw around when we talk about giving at church. I think we do the passages great disservice when we just make them stand up for that one reason. Because the only reason we can be givers is because of what we have been given. And so when Paul comes to the end of that section in chapter 9, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 11 through 15, he begins to end it with this prayer. And one of the things he says about in his prayer, he's thankful to God for the grace that he has given. Now we struggle with the concept of grace, but grace is very simple. It's a two-sided coin. Grace means that you get what you don't deserve. At the same time, you don't get what you do deserve. Everything we have in our lives is not because we earned it. And everything we are is because God didn't press the advantage of saying, you don't deserve this. That's grace. God has given and we have received. And Paul talks about that grace, and he comes to this crescendo at the end of the chapter. And he talks about, thank God for his indescribable gift. Now, I look at that word, indescribable. It's only used one time in all of Greek literature, and it's here. Aristotle didn't use it. Plato didn't use it. None of the great poets or playwrights of ancient Greece used it. Instead, only Paul used it. He coined it. He had to come up with an expression to try to say what he was trying to say. But then when he got to the word, he said, but it's just indescribable. There are no words to describe what God has given to us. And that can be everything from life at the beginning to life eternal through the blood of Jesus Christ. The indescribable gift of God is there. It's powerful information. To think that Paul, this master of words, had no word to describe what God has done for us. Do you know how that feels? Let me give you a few personal observations. Things that I've had to come to grips with. in the same area. Every year when I go to Nicaragua, when I get back on the plane, I've been in a place that is dirty. The people are hungry. They have diseases. They have all the things I don't have, or I have all the things they wish they had. And I get back on that plane, tired but filled with excitement about being home. But somewhere in that middle of that flight, I get pensive. I start thinking, and it happens every trip, by the way. Why is it that I was born when I was born in the place that I was born and given the parents I had? Why is it that I've gotten great education? I have more food to eat than I need, that I have this beautiful home that I can be comfortable in. I have a safe, clean bed at night. I live in a place where I can go outside and do what I need to do without fear. Why? I know the answer. The answer is simple. It's the grace of God. He gave it. I didn't earn it. I was placed at a place and time in circumstances I didn't choose just to be given the gifts of God. My second illustration, reflection, comes out 7 years ago. When my father died, both of my parents were now gone. And I don't know what this is. Maybe it's just me and who I am. But I don't know that children, especially grown children, really appreciate their parents until they don't have them anymore. But I started thinking, of all the things that my parents gave me, they gave me love, they gave me care. They were there when I was sick, when I was hurt. They were there when I was crushed. They were there every step of the way. They rejoiced with my joys. They wept with my sorrows. And when they were gone, I realized how great an influence they had been. And every day, I think in some pattern along the way, whether it be when I'm writing my journal in the morning or just when I'm about to go to bed at night, I always think in terms of, what would I have been had I not had them? Because what I am is what they gave me and made me. I want you to take that thought, magnify it millions and millions of times, and you haven't even scratched the surface of what God's done for you and me. Thank God for his indescribable gift. So how do we handle the whats of gratitude? I find it interesting that in order to understand thankfulness, it's interesting to find the words. And our word thank is really a corruption of another word in Old English. The Old English word that got corrupted to make thank was the word think. And all that really basically means is that you have to think before you can thank. So what do you need to think about in order to be grateful? Well, think about this. You need to put people on your list who have made you a better believer. You and I both know people. Maybe we've never told them. Maybe we just admire from afar. But when we looked at their life, or when we encountered their life, or when they intersected our lives, they made us a better believer. You need to put them on your list and thank God for those people. Because who you are is who they have helped make you. And never forget them. Because every memory creates more connection to a better life. Second thing you need to do is make sure you live your life well enough it goes on somebody else's list. You need to find somebody to influence, someone to inspire, someone to be an example to. So that when they look at their own list, they go, I've got to put that guy on my list because he's done so much for me. Be that kind of person that people can be grateful for. But then there's one last thing. Let's never forget that the one who gave it all is the one who gives it all. And it's the indescribable gift that has no words to match. That's the what of giving thanks. The people and the gifts of God are more important than things of life, but we're grateful for all. Last week, there was a terrible tragedy in Jonesboro, Arkansas. In the midst of all this coronavirus problem, the weather turned mean, and thunderstorms began to roll through central Arkansas. One of the pictures that came out of all of that was of a doctor named Dr. Jared Burks. Dr. Burks he's knee-deep in all the problems of our current crisis. He's concerned about his family. It's like many doctors are, and so they put their families somewhere else so they don't get infected because they're around the virus all day long.